Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Sunday Morning Live. This is your host, Aaron Tomlinson. Thank you for coming back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in, watching by replay. Hope you all are doing well. Let me just give it a second for some people to jump on. Make sure that I'm streaming in all the right places. And again, hope everybody's doing well. Interesting topic today. It's showing there. Not showing there. I don't know what's been going on there. So give me a second. All right, so if you see the title of my talk this morning, I'm going to talk about prophetic function, deconstruction, and expansion. So one of the things that I've been experiencing the last month or so in my life is really coming back home to myself in a lot of ways, and really coming to a deeper level of acceptance about my own spirituality, the role that it plays for me in my life, and being comfortable with that, moving more and more away from scientific materialism and atheism, which I never fully embraced. But I understand people who do. I really do. I understand people who do, and I think they have their place and their role. So I want to just share with you today my thoughts on what's happening for many of us in this community who are experiencing deconstruction, or other aspects of religious freedom, breaking away from stuff and getting into freedom and healing. And I want to look at the role of the prophet. I want to look at, just my interpretation of the times and the events that we are experiencing and that many of us are going through. Give me 1 second. I just need to respond to this. Okay, so let's talk about prophecy. Let's talk about prophecy. Let's talk about the prophet. If you come from a charismatic background like I do, if you come from any kind of Christian background, you're going to have some reference points for the term prophet that are going to, maybe you think of Old Testament prophets, you think of books of the Bible. Maybe you think of, a person who is a preacher or who preaches the word of God. Maybe if you come from a charismatic background like I do, you think of gifts of the Spirit. You think of things like personal prophecy, people, claiming to speak words from God over someone's life. For 1 Corinthians says edification, exhortation, comfort. Maybe you think of sort of an angry preacher who just rails against sin. Again, some of that Old Testament type of prophetic function. But I want to outframe the term prophet very simply for those of us that, have immediately turned to biblical references when we hear the term prophecy or we think of the term prophet, to raise awareness of the fact that even in the Bible itself, there were many types of prophets. In other words, here's what I'm trying to say. The charismatic world certainly does not corner the market, so to speak, on prophecy or prophets. And even the Bible itself, or Christianity or Judaism, doesn't corner the market on prophecy or prophets or anything like that. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, gotta love doing things live. All right, so there were prophets of Baal, obviously. There were prophets prior to the law, prior to Moses. I think the first person mentioned in the Bible as a prophet is Abraham. So we can think about the prophet then in a broader perspective, in an expanded perspective, not just from our life experience or the limitations that we place upon it. Now, of course, in the Bible, the false prophet is someone who speaks for a God other than Yahweh, or other than Jehovah, or other than, the one God, but maybe speaks for other deities, like I mentioned, like prophet of Baal and stuff like that. But then even what's interesting in the Bible, even in the nation of Israel, right, there were people who claimed to speak for Yahweh or claimed to speak for the one true God, but they were false prophets. I mean, one of the classic texts is found somewhere in Deuteronomy. I used to know the address, but as I get older, as I learn more information and have to make room for it, some of that information that I used to think was so important falls out. But I think it's Deuteronomy chapter 13, where it talks about characteristics of a false prophet. If someone makes a prediction and that prediction doesn't come to pass, then they didn't speak for Yahweh, so therefore they were a false prophet. If they were a prophet and they told you to go out and worship other gods and violate your relationship, your covenant with Yahweh by worshiping other gods, then they were a false prophet, even though they came up in the context of Israel or the Hebrew culture or Judaism. Some people might think of Samuel and the school of the prophets, and Saul. If you know anything about the story of King Saul comes around a group known as the school of the prophets that are prophesying, and he is overcome by the prophetic spirit, and then he begins to speak words of prophecy. So those are some biblical references for that, right? And so I'm just thinking about, because here's where I'm at. I am not of the persuasion, nor was I really ever, regardless of maybe how I came across, I'm not of the persuasion that Christianity, the church, religion, the Bible is all just one giant con game, and that we were all duped and we were deceived or deceived deceivers or deceiving or whatever, and gave the better part of our lives to that dedication to that faith. And so I'm not coming, and never have I come at this perspective. Yes, I think there are very toxic things. Yes, I do think there are areas where if we apply critical thinking, we can look at stuff and say, well, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't hold true. I think we can look at certain aspects of it and say this was controlling, this was egotistical, this was promoting an air of superiority and us against them, and either or dualism, all those things that I've talked about. But I'm at the place right now where I don't think that what's happening is just that we have the internet now and we have podcasts now and we have YouTube and we have all this information. And so we can find out that, for example, there's no historical evidence for anything in the first 5 books of the Bible, which is significant. I'm not a person that thinks, well, there's no historical evidence for Jesus. I stand firmly on the ground that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, especially when you're talking about an ancient Jewish person and carpenter. For me, there's enough evidence that the Jesus movement began, that it's here still today. For me, that's enough evidence. Personally, I think that argument doesn't hold any water whatsoever. Now, I have friends that really, my friend Derek Day really holds to that strongly, and I respect that, and I understand why he holds that proposition. And if we are going to hold to the belief, to the premise of what many people say is the gospel, that you have to get your history lesson right about Jesus, that you have to believe that Jesus died some kind of vicarious atonement for you on the cross, and you have to put your faith in the historical Jesus and his historical teachings and follow that as your guide for life, because that is the gospel, then I'm here for that, because it makes sense to me that if God really does love us, if God really does cherish our souls and wants us to be saved, And the one determining factor that gets us saved is whether or not we believe something historically happened, i.e. the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, more importantly. Then I think that the Creator, if he did love us that much, would leave evidence of Jesus and of the resurrection and stuff like that. And I know there are arguments all over the board on that. I don't want to get into the weeds with that, because personally, I don't think that was ever the intention of the Gospels or the intention of the life and ministry and teachings of Jesus, whether he existed or not, but what is coded for us and recorded for us in the Scriptures. So what I'm trying to say is that when we start thinking through stuff critically, and we understand, okay, we're telling people that they are going to go to a fiery pit of hell for all eternity if they don't make a profession of faith that is based on this historical person and based on these historical events, then I agree there should be more evidence for that. And the fact that there's not kind of makes maybe God's love for us and the credibility of that message a little suspect. However, when we're talking about the Exodus, when we're talking about Moses, we're talking about Egyptians who kept really good records of their history, of their battles, of their defeats as well as their victories. And we find nothing in the historical documents that talk about the Jews as slaves, the Hebrews as slaves, the Hebrews as slaves. We find nothing to support the Egyptian army drowning in the Red Sea. There's not only is there not archaeological evidence that supports the historical claims, the archaeological evidence actually contradicts the historical claims. It goes against it. It disproves it. And so those can all be good reasons, right? Where we can say, okay, something's going on here. Something's wrong. Like I can't maybe take the Bible as the word of God, literally interpreting it. It's inerrant in all statements and facts, etc., and so on. So yeah, we have information available to us that we can then begin to deconstruct or adjust our beliefs wherever you're at on this journey, right? And so where a lot of people have landed is, God, this is terrible. This is horrible. My life was ruined by this. And I'm sympathetic to that. Don't misunderstand me. I'm empathic to that because I've had those thoughts myself. My wife has had those thoughts. Other people that I know, friends and family members and clients that I coach on religious trauma, that's a very real thing. And the anger and the angst and the grief, those are all very, very real things. And then a lot of people just end up in atheism, which I find to be incredibly depressing. I just find it to be incredibly depressing. I understand why people go there. I understand the need to defend that and to advance that philosophically. But at the end of the day, then humanity really has no oversight. Evolution itself has no terminus. There is no plan. And this isn't just atheism. This is also found in a lot of Eastern philosophies as well. And I'm just not there. I do think, and this is very Western thinking, but I do believe currently in reincarnation. And for whatever reason, in this incarnation, I came as a Western person. So I have no problem thinking like a Western person. And a lot of people that get into Eastern philosophies tend to build a presupposition that maybe because it's older, or maybe because it explains things better, or maybe because they've had really tremendous freeing and healing experiences practicing things like Zen meditation or Zen Buddhism or whatever the case may be, that somehow Eastern philosophies are correct and Western philosophies. So in other words, if you think one way and it lines up with Eastern philosophy, it must be closer to the truth. And if you think one way, but it lines up more with Western philosophy, well, that's just because you're in the West and that's just Western philosophy. And so Western philosophy is a little bit more linear. It is a little bit more progressive. some things that are hallmarks of Western philosophy that you won't necessarily find as much in the East. And I know I'm speaking very broadly, very generally, and I'm not an expert, which I've said many times. I am not an expert in any way, shape, or form. I'm not even a novice when it comes to Eastern thought, but my understanding of one of the differences between Eastern thought and Western thought is Western thought believes in the existence of a soul, that we have a, let's put it this way, a constant, independent point of consciousness that existed in potentially eternity past and will exist going forward. So in other words, I have a soul that reincarnates, right? Whereas in the East, I'm not sure about the concept of the self in the East. So I think there are some distinct differences there. And then also this idea that there is a goal. There is, so here's what I'm saying. I do believe in God. I do believe in a creator, a source, divine. Again, I find the terminology to be problematic because of simply on the grounds of communication. Because when I say I believe in God, I'm not saying I believe in the Christian God of the Bible like I used to, but I do believe that there is a divine presence that comes from a source, a creator that created all things. I do believe that consciousness or mind is base reality, that everything else is a result of consciousness. And I know that has upset and offended some people I was very close to. You know, it's amazing. We get offended and upset over the dumbest stuff and over a lot of stuff that is just philosophical by nature anyway. In other words, we can't prove it one way or the other. And yet we live in such a divisive culture that we just let those things divide us as well. I'm just telling you where I'm at and how I think and what I believe. So I do believe in the spirit. I do believe in a divine presence. I do believe in God. So therefore, I do believe that there is an orchestrated plan. I do believe in an orchestrated plan. I do believe in guidance. I do believe in oversight, not necessarily judgment like we used to think, where we're going to stand before God and give account. But I do believe we're growing and we're evolving. And I do believe that there is an intelligence that underlies nature. Hell, I believe in nature spirits. I believe that I believe in, you know, that there are elemental spirits, that everything that exists has consciousness assigned to it, and that for everything we see on the material plane, there are invisible planes and immaterial planes that represent, thus the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. In other words, there are corresponding levels of consciousness for everything that we see until we get to ultimately this super mind, which I would call God or the mind of the universe, whatever the case may be. And I'm well aware of all the arguments that go against that, and that you have to be able to prove that. I'm well aware, and I've engaged for years on the topic of theodicy, which is the problem of evil. If God is good, if God is loving, then why does evil exist? Why is all this? You know, if God exists, apparently God doesn't give a shit. I've been down that path. I've, allowed my thinking to be challenged with that. I'm just not there. I just don't find those arguments compelling. I don't find them convincing. And most importantly for me, I don't find them inspiring. I don't find them empowering. I don't find them beneficial. I don't find them liberating in any way, shape, or form. Now, that's just me. There are other people out there that claim that they're inspired by them. I wonder if that's really true. But nevertheless, I'm going to take them at their word and trust that there are people that find that inspiring and liberating and all that stuff. Aaron, you just seem like you're rambling. What are you talking about? So if we begin with the presupposition that there is a mind, call it consciousness, call it God, call it spirit, call it the divine, call it source, call it the universe, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to use the term God. I'm just going to get more comfortable with that, using that term. So if we begin with the presupposition that there is an intelligent design to everything, that there is a plan, that there is an orchestration, that there is God, that there is spirit, that there is unseen realities that influence our lives, that we can influence to influence our lives, and all of that stuff. If we begin there as a presupposition, So that, yes, God exists. Yes, God has a plan. God has a plan collectively for us. God has a plan, I believe, individually for us. However, I want to be very clear here. We are moving into an age, and this is super important, and this is why deconstruction is important, because we are moving into a time period where we no longer surrender our sovereignty as an independent conscious agent. I'm going to say that again. We no longer surrender our power, our control. We're in the driver's seat, in other words. So when I say, yeah, there's a plan, it's not like, oh, I've got to surrender to this plan and put God in the driver's seat so that I follow that. I'm not suggesting that or saying that at all. I think the plan is that we grow up. And the problem with Piscean religions and the religious structures of the Piscean age, of the previous age, is that they infantilized us. This idea, I remember being at conferences and just being baffled, even at 30 years old, going to these conferences where you've got these 50-year-old men, people my age, or 30-year-old men or 20-year-old men, it really didn't matter. And they're looking for their spiritual father, or they're calling a man, 5 years older than them, or in some cases 10 or 20 years younger than them. This is my spiritual father. That's infantilization. That's absolutely ridiculous. I remember sitting there thinking, I had a dad. I have been raised. I'm not looking for my daddy. And it perpetuates power structures that can be abusive. It perpetuates all kinds of negative things, and interacting with those groups for many, many years, all I saw was dysfunction and really lousy fruit. So when I'm saying there's a plan, I'm not suggesting, I want to be very clear, I'm not suggesting that it is a plan that infantilizes you, that takes you out of the driver's seat. In fact, what I would say is the plan is for you and I to take more responsibility for our lives, take more responsibility for our future, take more responsibility and accountability to ourselves, from ourselves, because we are in the driver's seat of our lives. And so therefore we cannot continue to put ourselves at effect instead of cause regarding our lives, and continue to blame other people for our problems. Okay, Aaron, you're rambling. So what I'm saying is, let's talk about prophetic function. Let's come back to talking about prophetic function. Prophetic function in the community is a voice. Here's how I'm going to define it. A voice divinely inspired, that speaks a word designed to be an agent of change in collective and community consciousness. A prophet is a person who speaks a word or words, and those words are designed, they are divinely inspired, and they are designed to be an agent of change within the consciousness of the community. So it's different than channeling. Channeling is different. I've worked with some people I really, really trust that are channels, and I know personally that I, have worked with. A lot of channeling I find completely suspect. But regardless, this isn't channeling. This isn't just, thus saith the Lord, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and this is going on. Behold, I do a new thing. Consciousness is being raised. You're experiencing these things. That's all fine and dandy, but it's fine. It's fine. I'm just making a distinction between channeling and what I call true prophetic function. True prophetic function is designed to change mindsets. And we have community mindsets. We have collective mindsets. We have community agreements, collective agreements, social contracts, social agreements that place limitations upon our lives and govern the way in which we live and the way in which we function. Some of that can be empowering, and much of it can be causing limitation. So here's the problem. A lot of people, especially in the church, that claim to be prophets have never left the church. Remember I said Abraham in the Bible was, I believe, the first person to be called a prophet. I could be wrong, but I believe if he's not the first, he's one of the first. The story of Abraham begins in Genesis chapter 12 with God telling Abraham, or Abram at the time, to leave his country, to leave his father's house, to leave his family. There's a list of things. He says, get out. And the word get out, incidentally, interestingly enough, is the same word for Exodus. So in order for Abraham to get from the Ur of the Chaldees into the land that God promised him, he has to go through an exodus. And the exodus is out of his land, away from his father's house, basically away from his family. Now, it is one thing for us to leave a place physically. It's one thing for us to move out of our parents' house. It's one thing for us to move away from the city or the community in which we were born. It's one thing for us to leave the country, maybe an expatriate to another country. It's something else altogether for that process to happen internally. In other words, there are so many people I know that are still children in their minds trying to live up. I went through this as an adult, still being a child in my own mind, trying to live up to my family values, trying to live up to, and still being governed and controlled by messaging that I received from my family, from my community, from my father's house. You get what I'm saying? So even though I'm not living under my mom and dad's roof, I'm still, you know that old saying, if you're going to live in this roof, you're going to follow my rules. I can leave the roof and still be following the rules because my consciousness, my mindset, my behaviors, the way I think, the way I talk, the way I present myself, the way I feel was so programmed in childhood that I never leave that, right? And so it's one thing to leave the church. It's another thing to get the church to leave you. It's one thing to leave your mother and father's house. It's another thing for you to mentally and emotionally leave your mother and father's house. I hope this is making sense for you. And so there is a process. There are people, I believe, who are maybe they're early adopters. Maybe they just have special gifting. But I believe that their function is, and that they are the happiest, that they are the best served when they follow their function. And their function is to serve as some type of prophetic voice within the community, meaning that you will go through a process of dismantling the paradigm first, so that you're outside the paradigm, so you can see more clearly the future before it happens, and you begin to speak into the paradigm so that your words become an agent of change that then moves the community from one level of consciousness into another level of consciousness. I hope that makes sense. So Abram had to not only go through the Exodus externally, but he had to go through, a lot of the story there is him going through the Exodus internally. And I think if we read the scriptures metaphorically and understand that it's speaking to human realities that we are presently experiencing, that we are presently going through in a metaphoric and symbolic sort of way, in the way that Joseph Campbell talks about a myth, that a myth speaks to and unlocks your spiritual potentials. I think that's where the religion got off, missed the boat, missed the mark, was they wanted to look at everything literally, like a literal history, rather than letting it speak in the present moment and allowing the patterns that are there to emerge and then relate to us and engage with us and interact with us in our present life so that we can make sense of our lives and we can move forward and progress. So last week, so I hope that helps. So if someone is speaking, claims to be a prophet, but they are supporting the paradigm, they are maintaining the paradigm, they are perpetuating the paradigm, then that person really, by my definition at least, is not functioning in any kind of prophetic capacity that has any real value as far as moving humanity or moving the needle forward. So from my definition, people who are who have deconstructed and have fully embraced atheism and scientific materialism, and they are speaking back from that position into the community in some way, shape, or form, they are operating under prophetic under prophetic function, even though I completely disagree with their philosophical foundations and presuppositions. All right. So moving on. Last week, I talked about being in this space. I talked about this a little bit last week as well, where I talked about Moses, whose name means to be withdrawn from the water. Again, interpreting symbolically, metaphorically, to be pulled or withdrawn from the water mystically representing in the Hebrew mind consciousness, streams of consciousness, ways of thinking. And I showed how through the life of Moses, he went through many being pulled out of the water, not just as a baby, but he experienced that at least 3 times over. And then he takes the children of Israel through the parting of the Red Sea, right, into a new level of consciousness to where they can't go back to the old. Because once you see it and you really see it, you can't go back to not seeing it or seeing it the way that it was before. Once you wake up, unless you go back to sleep right away, once you wake up and you stay awake for a while, it can be hard for you to go back to sleep. Again, I'm speaking metaphorically. All right. So I talked about the destruction of the temple. I talked about why I use the term deconstruction to describe the process that I went through the last 7-8 years, especially in the beginning, because you pull apart. Jesus said, Matthew 24, the disciples are showing him the temple, and he says, I say unto you, not one stone will be left upon another. In other words, the temple would be so thoroughly destroyed that there wouldn't even be 2 stones left together. That would be completely deconstructed, right? So this religious system, because the temple was central to the religious system in Israel, this religious system will be so torn apart. This is what Jesus said. This religious system will be so torn apart that not one stone will be left upon another. And Jesus' prophetic function was transitional. Watch this. It was transitional from the age of the law and the prophets, the age of what we call the Old Covenant, or from a broader perspective, the age of Aries, which is an astrological age. I don't have time to get into all of that. Hopefully, if you've watched some of my other videos, you know what I'm talking about. And then he's moving them towards the age of what he calls the kingdom, or the age of the new covenant, some call it, or the age of Pisces, moving out of the age of Aries and into the age of Pisces. So there had to be a deconstructing. There had to be, like in Hebrews chapter 12, where it says everything that can be shaken will be shaken, so that only that which cannot be shaken may remain. It all has to do with the destruction of the temple, with the breaking of the egg, if you will, the box, the bubble of Judaism at that time, for something I believe that was far more expansive and incredibly revolutionary for its time. So that's why I call it deconstruction. But as I was meditating this week and was thinking back over where I'm at in my life, getting comfortable with it, thinking about what I had experienced in my life and getting comfortable with it, something I began to realize is that this whole process was all for the purpose of expansion. It was all for the purpose of busting and breaking up that which limited us. So using the temple again as a metaphor, the belief of that time period, not just in the temple in Israel, but in any temple, was that it was the link between the heavens and the earth. It created the temple itself, the space itself, created a link between what was in the invisible realm, those higher conscious agents, if you will, the divine, the more evolved, the gods, the goddesses, dwelt in the temple, not exclusively, but that's where the portal was. That's where the link was. That's where Jacob's ladder was. That was the understanding of temples in the ancient times. So what we see, the primary change that we see, at least one of the primary changes that we see, is the deconstruction of the old model, the deconstruction of the old paradigm, which limits the availability of those spaces and anchors between heaven and earth, those Jacob's ladders, if you will, those portals, those openings, if you will. In other words, John chapter 4 is brilliant. Jesus meets with the Samaritan woman and the woman at the well, and she says, on which mountain should we worship? On this mountain or that mountain? The point being, which one is the actual gateway to ascension? Which one is the actual gateway to the divine? Which one actually is the bridge or the ladder between heaven and earth? This place over here or that place over there? And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, a time is coming and now is when neither on this mountain or that mountain will you worship, but those who follow the Father will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And the Father is seeking those that will serve him, not in physical locations, but will have an elevation of consciousness to realize the ubiquity, the ubiquitous access points that exist within the human being as sort of, and so the transition is from God's or God dwelling in a temple made by hands and Christ in you, as Paul put it, the hope of glory. Christ, the divine, dwelling inside of you. And that's where I have, and so that's the transition of the thinking. So while it is deconstruction, while it is no stone left upon the other, while it is a pulling apart of belief systems and things that we gave our lives to and things that we were devoted to, while that stuff gets shaken and everything that can be shaken gets shaken and no stone is left upon another and it's all pulled apart and it's all deconstructed for us, the end result is incredible expansion. The New Testament, when read through this lens, is not at that time period trying to limit and create an us against them kind of mentality. It is trying to break, completely shatter the us against them type mentality, to break down the wall of division, as it says in Ephesians 2, between Jews and Gentiles, between male and female, between slave and free, right? So that it's all Christ and Christ is in all, or the divine spark, the divine consciousness, the presence of the divine, that every human being has access to it. That's why, again, the story of the woman at the well, Jesus says, if you ask of me for something to drink, I will give you a drink, not that makes you dependent upon me, but that will open up for you the realization that you have within you a well of living water that you can go to inside of yourself for spiritual sustenance and spiritual support and spiritual strength and spiritual refreshing anytime you want to, because it's not on this mountain or on that mountain. It's actually something that dwells within you. Later in John chapter 7, Jesus says, out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. And this is where then I part with atheism and scientific materialism. Because if this is true, if the point at the age of Pisces and the point of all of Christianity was not to build doctrines and denominations and divisions and things of this nature, if Jesus did exist and whatever started the Jesus movement, whether it comes from a person or it just comes from an idea, the idea that was so powerful back then that God does not dwell in a temple made by hands, but that you are the temple of the Holy Spirit, that God dwells inside of you, the greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world, then what happens is I'm cutting myself off from myself. I'm cutting myself off from the most powerful components of myself. I'm cutting myself off from the deepest wells of refreshing and empowerment and wisdom that I carry as a divine agent, as a human being made in the image of God, as one who has the divine spark that can be fanned into flame, as one that has a well of divine, everlasting, refreshing water inside of me, as someone out of whom there are supposed to flow rivers of living water. And that's not just true of me, that's true of you. That's true of everyone that we meet. Everybody has that potential. Everybody has that untapped stuff inside of them. And so if that is the case, and I do believe that that is the case, and since that is my presupposition, then scientific materialism and atheism, what it actually does is creates a different kind of prison and a different kind of limitation that shuts me off from being able to have access to the most potent aspects of my own nature. I'm leaving one jail cell to go into another jail cell, in my opinion, if those things are true. Now, if those things aren't true, then, then I'm just delusional, I guess. And there are people out there that will think that. But if it is true, I'm cutting myself off from the most powerful, potent, dynamic, inspiring aspects of my own being. I become alienated from myself once again. I've cut myself off from my most powerful resources. So the message of real Christianity, according to Colossians, I think it's chapter 2 or chapter 1, maybe it's chapter 1 around verse 27, is it's the revelation of the secret that's been hidden from all generations, and that is Christ, or the divine consciousness, the mind of God, the Logos in you, the hope that gives you hope of glory that is to be revealed in you. So that was the age of Pisces. Now, when you look at the sign Pisces, what you discover is it's two fish sort of chained together, sort of pulling in different directions. Spiritual teachers that I respect, that resonate with me, that I resonate with, that I've listened to, talk about the age of Pisces as the parent-child age. Again, going back to the infantilization process. Jesus is my Lord. The Holy Spirit is in control. I have a guru. The word guru means someone who dispels darkness. So I submit myself to a guru who dispels darkness. I submit myself to a teacher who has followed a well-trodden path so that I can follow in my teacher's footsteps. I do believe there's value in that, by the way. But that became the structure, the Pope, the priest. And by the way, those of you that want to mock Catholicism, but you have to call your pastor, your spiritual father, your spiritual covering, or you answer to an apostle, or you answer to a prophet, you're doing the same thing. Now, the age of Aquarius, on the other hand, is an age when everything starts to come together in a cooperative fashion, in a collaborative fashion, without the hierarchies. So some of what we're seeing, even though I think the initial effect and impact of it is very detrimental. But one of the things that we're seeing as we're shifting ages, because we're also in a shift of an age. Jesus said, I'll be with you to the end of the age. And he said, follow the man with the water pitcher in his hand and follow him into the upper room, and there I shall sup with you. He's making an astrological prophetic proclamation saying, yes, I'm here with you to the end of the age, but you need to follow the man with the water pitcher in his hand, which is the sign of Aquarius in the sky, because he will lead you to a higher place. He'll lead you to an upper room of consciousness that is more collaborative, that's not infantilizing, that leaves you in the driver's seat. That becomes an age where that becomes an age that is egalitarian, not equality. There will never be equality for all because that's just ludicrous. The problem with that is in the statement itself. It's like, can God, if God's all powerful, can he make a rock hard enough or too heavy for him to lift? Like, it's just, it's confusing. It's wrong, completely wrong. But egalitarianism means that everyone is assigned, let's say, equal value, equal worth, so that we're working together. So the death of expertise that we're seeing, where people go to their doctor and they've already diagnosed themselves on, I call it draaron.com, and know what they should be prescribed. And they walk into the doctor's office and say, here's what's wrong with me. Here's how I want you to fix it. I need a prescription from you, that kind of thing, where people become experts in geopolitical struggles in Middle East. They become experts on Israel and Gaza and Palestine overnight because that's what's on their Twitter feed, and they've read a few articles or whatever. People become experts on pandemics and infectious disease overnight. We saw that in 2020. So that we have opinions about all these things, and we think we've done our research and we think we're the experts on everything. It's a collective death of expertise. There is a collective dying of leadership and leadership models. That's why we can't seem to find good leadership today, not just in the political realm, but in any realm, the corporate realm, the education realm. There's just a real lack of quality leadership. That is by design, because we are leaving the structures and the paradigms of the age of Pisces, and we are moving into a new age of Aquarius. And while we have some idea what Aquarius will look like, we certainly don't have the blueprint. We certainly don't have all of the patterns. So where are we in the process? We are in the process of the temple being destroyed. But because of the work that was done 2,000 some, however many hundred years ago, when we moved from the age of animal sacrifice, the age of Aries, into the age of, because that's the other thing that was done away with, that was part of the old age, was animal sacrifice. We moved out of the lamb, the ram. We moved out of the age of Aries and we moved into the age of Pisces. Now we're swimming like it's consciousness. God doesn't dwell in a temple made by hands. God dwells inside of you. But we still had power structures based on doctrines, based on belief systems, based on religious hierarchies, political hierarchies, and things of this nature. So that hierarchies are a component. So that's the temple today, right? That's the temple today. So what has to be torn down are the doctrines of limitation. What has to be torn down are the doctrines that do us harm. What has to be torn down, right, are these religious systems, political systems, educational systems, everything that can be shaken will be shaken, because so much of it is built on this paradigm of the old age and the old era, and we are moving into the new age. But we are at the point, because we're just at the beginning, where the temple is being destroyed, where mentally and emotionally we are being challenged, where the battle lines today are not based on rivers or lands. The battle lines today are primarily ideologies and ideas. We're divided with each other politically on each side of the aisle. And I'm not doing this false equivalency thing because I don't think they're equal. I think one is definitely more radical than the other, but there are radical elements on both sides of the political fence, both left and right. And we're divided over those things. We're divided over those things, because that's the temple that has to be destroyed. But here's what I want to get to. The deconstruction process is not just to take something away from you. It's not just to, like the women said on the resurrection day, they've taken away my Lord and I don't know where they've laid him. It's not just to take away your Lord and let you wonder where he's been laid. It is an expanding process. It is a liberating process. Just like the temple, they said, God dwells here. Woman at the well, God dwells here or God dwells there. The temple will be destroyed, because neither on this mountain or that mountain will you serve, but God is looking for those that will serve him in worship, or worship him in spirit and in truth. God does not dwell in a temple made by hands. God dwells inside of you. You are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Right? So there had to come first deconstruction of the old. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that if you are part of this community, whether you share my beliefs and convictions or not, or whether I share yours or not, if you are part of this community, if you are part of this exodus that is leaving not just the gathering place, not just the church, not just the Father's house, going back to Abram, but you are leaving it internally as well. In other words, the doctrines, the beliefs that imposed or were imposed upon you that don't make sense to you anymore are being pulled stone by stone apart, belief by belief, structure by structure, bit by bit. In other words, that thing that you built line upon line, precept upon precept, many of us, each precept, each line is being pulled apart and scattered. It's not to take something away from you. It's to expand you. It's to grow you. It's to expand your consciousness. And therefore, I believe with all my heart, you are part of the new move of the Spirit. You are part of a prophetic community, a prophetic company, a company of early adopters who are leaving the old. I mean, how many times, if you were in the charismatic world, did we prophesy or hear prophesied, behold, I do a new thing. It's not going to be like the old thing. It's going to be a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not perceive it? And yet those same voices never left the paradigm. And so they're speaking to support the paradigm. So the best they can do is let us know, those of us that were in those paradigms back then, that something new is coming. That's the best that they could do. But now there's a company of people. And again, wherever you land, whether it's scientific materialism, atheism, or some alternative form of spirituality, like where I'm landing, or some kind of place where I'm finding space right now to merge the old with the new and to see a flow and to see the continuity and to see that the spirit consciousness, the divine inspiration is moving in this community, that this is on the cutting edge of what's happening, at least in the context of the subculture of those of us that were indoctrinated in church culture and in church doctrine, and now we are leaving it and moving forward into it. And so I'm wondering what you guys think. So I'm playing with this idea and I'm embracing this idea that this wasn't just a random thing. This wasn't just that I got smart and woke up. This certainly wasn't anything that happened from a place of bitterness or woundedness or hurt, though there was bitterness, though there has been wounding, though there has been hurt. I talked about that last week. I talked about having to go to Mara and have the bitter waters made sweet. But that there is a movement because of the time period in which we are, because we are we're not the only, but we are one of, if not the first transitional generation from one age to another, from one structure of religion to another, so that all the stuff that we see in the New Testament, the end of an age, it is the end of an age. It's not the end of the world. The shaking, everything that can be shaken so that that which cannot be shaken may remain. We're in that time period. The destruction of the temple, the diaspora, where the community is spread now, where we're finding each other more online than we're finding each other at the coffee shop. The Jews in the scriptures, there was a diaspora, there was a dispersing because of the destruction of the temple, because of the destruction of Jerusalem. And this is rooted in the conflict that we see today, because they dispersed, but they maintained community, but they did it throughout various parts of the Middle East and Europe and stuff like that. I don't want to get too into that. But we're part of the modern diaspora. And yeah, we're going to debate, we're going to argue just like they did. James and Peter couldn't agree with Paul, and Paul couldn't agree with John, and John couldn't agree with Paul. And it's just a big, huge mess, especially in the finer points of philosophy and doctrine and future and the place of the Gentiles and the place of the Jews, and whether we should eat meat, sacrifice to idols, or, all of that different stuff. And then that's not even counting the Gnostics. It's not even counting the Gnostics. or the Gnostic Gospels, fighting over which book is going to be included in the Christian Bible, and then a full-on persecution, not just in the beginning, but by the Catholic Church during the Inquisitions, but also the Crusades. I mean, people think the Crusades were all against the Muslims. No, there were Crusades against any heretics. And so there were groups of Gnostic believers, spiritual mystical believers in France and other places in Europe that were wiped out by the Crusaders. Because for that time period, those structures were supported by the astrological effect of the age upon consciousness, because as above, so below. We're moving away from that now. We're moving more into the age of Aquarius. And so it's no coincidence at all that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the last century and have been translated. It's no coincidence at all that the Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic texts and Gospels that were lost for centuries, were suddenly found and recovered and translated and made available. Why now? They thought they'd wiped them out. So that's why I said there's some orchestration, there's some plan. Because we need those things, because it's the divine spark, it's the reality, the truth that must be preserved and built upon from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius is the truth that you carry a divine spark within you, that you carry a well of living water within you, that you carry a presence and anointing within you and upon you and in your life. That has to make the transition. So therefore, about the time that we're shifting the ages, depending on who you talk to, depending on how you equate it, those things surface so that we have that light that we can take and build upon and realize the true message was never believe in the historical person and thou shalt be saved from the fires of hell. The true message was never a conquering king coming back to destroy his enemies. The true message was God does not dwell in a temple made by hands. In a religious structure, in a denomination, in a group, the real message was, let's move away from us against them. Let's move away from me and the other. Let's move away from having to impose our belief system onto other people through a sort of Rene Girardian scapegoating mechanism that's at work subconsciously within us. And that's the light that we need to have in order to go forward for the purposes of expansion, not for the purposes of subtraction, the purpose of addition. So that by letting go of Christian superiority, where we believe that we are somehow superior to every other, or our system of belief is superior to everybody else's, we become more inclusive. We become more open. Like the Celtic Christians, we're not looking for the darkness in people that are different than us. We are looking for the divine light and their unique expression and diversity of that divine light, and how that can expand us, how that can add to us, how that can multiply us. We're not condemning groups that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, because we're not looking for the darkness that's there. We're looking for the light that is within them that can liberate us. We're looking for the divine light in some of these other paths. I can fellowship with somebody who practices Wicca because I'm not looking for the darkness that's there. I'm looking for the divine spark being practiced in diversity. I can even hang around with people who subscribe to Anton LaVey's satanic philosophy, which is really just Ayn Rand's philosophy put into theatrical and religious costume and look for the divine light there. Because that's where we're moving to. That's the age of Aquarius. But I couldn't do that before because I had the light and they had the darkness. I can fellowship and have great conversations, challenging conversations, intellectually formidable conversations with people who have gone into full-on scientific atheism, even though I believe, as I said earlier, that's just exchanging one system of bondage for another. That's my opinion. That's my experience. But I can still sit there and listen to them and understand the divine light, because there is divine light in science, and humanity needed that. We needed science in order to progress. We needed the scientific method in order to get to where we are today in terms of our technologies and things like that. And AI is part of this plan of expansion of consciousness. I'm just saying these things are not happening randomly. So you see my point. People that are scientific atheists, there's still divine light in there, whether they recognize it or not, from my perspective. So I start looking for the light in everything instead of the darkness in things, so that the end result of deconstruction is not subtraction. The end result of deconstruction is addition and expansion. I'd love to know what you think. For some reason, comments aren't showing up for me at all. Maybe nobody's commenting. It does show that people are online. Let me know what you think about this. Is the direction that I'm taking. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I do read every comment, even if I don't reply or respond. Thank you for taking time out of your day, whether you're watching this live or you're going to watch this later, whatever time it is for you. Thank you for listening to my voice. Thank you, those of you that are interacting and engaging with me. Thank you to those of you, especially that are interacting in the New Day Global group and the private Facebook group. If you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like to be part of that private Facebook group, the link is in the description. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whatever your plans are. And I hope that this edified you, built you up, challenged you in some way, shape, or form. I will be with you. I'm looking forward to doing more content. I know I keep saying that, but I am moving into my slower time in terms of my day job, with everybody, with all the graduations and everything like that. So I should have more time, but definitely more inspiration to devote, because I just feel really strongly and good, connected, congruent, unified inside in this direction. So God bless you. Be at peace. May all of life's best come to you, and I will definitely be